Today, I'm going to be going over every mistake and bad decision made in I Am Legend and explain what I would have done differently to survive. The movie opens with a TV interview featuring Dr. Alice Crippen, who announces that she's turned the measles virus into a cure for cancer. Unfortunately, things go very wrong. The virus mutates, spreads across the world, and within a few months, civilization completely falls apart. Around 90% of humanity dies, while almost everyone else becomes infected and transforms into terrifying creatures known as Darkseekers. And that right there is my first survival lesson. If governments all over the world start announcing that a brand new virus is spreading faster than they can contain it, I'm not sitting around hoping it'll all blow over. I'm packing everything I can, avoiding heavily populated areas, and getting as far away from major cities as possible before panic kicks in. Because once millions of people start trying to leave at the same time, it's already too late. We then flash forward 3 years and arrive in New York City. Except it barely even looks like New York anymore. Nature has completely reclaimed the streets. Abandoned cars are scattered everywhere. Deer are casually running through Times Square, and there's not another human being in sight. And that's one of the creepiest parts of the entire movie. There aren't constant jump scares or explosions. It's just silent. The kind of silence that makes you feel like something is watching you even when nothing's there. We then meet Robert Neville, who appears to be the last man left in the entire city. Now, I have to give this guy some serious credit. Surviving 3 years completely alone in Manhattan is an unbelievable achievement. Most horror movie characters can't survive 3 hours before wandering into a basement they definitely shouldn't be in. But every morning, Neville follows the exact same routine. He checks the time, opens the reinforced steel shutters protecting his home, loads up his weapons, and heads into the city with his dog Sam. Now, this is actually something I completely agree with. Routine is one of the most important parts of surviving any apocalypse. It keeps you disciplined, keeps you productive, and stops you from making stupid, impulsive decisions. If I survived something like this, every single day would have a schedule. Wake up early, check the perimeter, refill water supplies, look for food, make sure the generators are working, then be safely back home long before the sun starts setting. The second you start getting lazy because nothing bad happened yesterday, that's usually the day everything goes wrong. Eventually, Neville heads over to the South Street Seaport to broadcast his daily message over the radio. Every single day, he tells anyone listening that he'll be waiting there at midday, promising food, shelter, and safety. Now, I don't actually think broadcasting for survivors is a bad idea. If I genuinely believe there were other immune people out there, I'd probably want to contact them too. The problem is, he's doing the exact same thing every single day. Same place, same time, same routine. If another survivor can predict where you're going, then so can the infected if they happen to be paying attention. Personally, I'd be changing locations constantly. One day I'd broadcast from the harbor, the next from the opposite side of the city. Maybe even skip a few days entirely. Survival is all about staying unpredictable, and Neville is slowly becoming the easiest person in New York to track. After the broadcast, Neville heads into an abandoned video rental store, where we get one of the saddest reminders of just how isolated he's become. He's having full conversations with mannequins, asking them questions and pretending they're real people. And look, I don't even blame him. 3 years without another proper conversation would completely destroy almost anyone mentally. Humans just aren't built to be alone for that long. If I somehow survived this apocalypse by myself, keeping my mind occupied would be just as high on my priority list as food and water. I'd read books, exercise every day, keep a journal, learn new skills, maybe even talk to myself if I had to. Because the second your mental health starts slipping, your decision making usually goes with it. As Neville leaves the store, he notices something strange. One of the mannequins has somehow moved outside and is standing in the middle of the street. Now, this immediately sets off alarm bells in my head. Mannequins don't just decide to go for a walk. Either another survivor has been here, or something moved it on purpose. And that's all the information I need. I'm leaving immediately, because whatever moved that mannequin clearly wants my attention, and I'm not giving it that satisfaction. Neville, however, can't let it go. Instead of driving away, he walks closer to investigate. Then he gets even closer, and just when he thinks everything's fine, a cable trap launches him upside down into the air. Now, I have to admit, this trap is actually genius. It's simple, effective, and it tells us something absolutely terrifying. The infected are learning. They're observing Neville's behavior, copying his methods, and setting traps of their own. Up until now, Neville has treated them almost like wild animals, but this proves they're far more intelligent than he ever imagined. And this changes everything. Because if my enemies are smart enough to study me, then I need to stop being predictable. Every supply run, every hunting trip, every radio broadcast, I'd be changing it constantly. But things quickly go from bad to worse as Neville drops his knife all dangling upside down. He's desperately trying to free himself, but every second wasted is bringing him closer to sunset. And in this movie, sunset is basically a death sentence. The infected only come out at night, meaning Neville has just gone from having all the time in the world to having only a few minutes before the city belongs to them. And this is exactly why I'd avoid situations like this in the first place. The biggest advantage humans have in this movie is daylight. The second you lose that advantage, your chances of surviving drop massively. Eventually, Neville cuts himself free, but by now it's already getting dark, and the infected begin emerging from the shadows, sprinting toward him at full speed. These things are absolutely relentless. They're not slow zombies that stumble around waiting to be shot. They're ridiculously fast, incredibly strong, and once they spot you, they don't stop. Neville barely manages to escape thanks to Sam buying him enough time to reach the car. And the worst part is, this entire sequence could have been avoided if he'd simply ignored the mannequin and driven away. Sometimes the smartest survival move is recognizing when something is trying to lure you in and refusing to play along. And one thing you should never wait until last minute to do is subscribe, because I've got plenty more horror movie survival breakdowns coming soon that you do not want to miss. The next day though, Neville returns to his lab, where he's been spending years trying to create a cure for the virus. Now, I genuinely respect this about him. Even after losing almost everyone on Earth, he's still trying to save humanity. That's admirable. The only difference is, I probably wouldn't be doing it. I'm not a scientist. I'd almost certainly have no idea what I was doing, and I'd probably end up wasting valuable resources chasing something I'm not qualified to solve. My priority would simply be surviving, growing food, collecting rainwater, reinforcing my shelter, and finding other immune people. Let these scientists handle the cure. I'll focus on staying alive. But then, one of Neville's latest experiments finally gives him hope. The treatment he's testing on an infected woman he captured might actually be working. And while that's amazing news, hope can be incredibly dangerous, because it has a funny way of convincing people to take risks they'd normally never consider, and that's exactly what's about to happen. While driving through the city the following day, Sam suddenly spots a deer and immediately chases after it into a dark building. Neville doesn't even hesitate. He runs straight in after her. Now, emotionally, I completely understand this. Sam has been his only companion for 3 years. She saved his life multiple times, and she's basically family at this point. But from a survival perspective, this is a terrible decision. Running blind into an unfamiliar building is exactly how people get trapped. Neville has absolutely no idea what's inside, and he has no escape plan and no backup. He's relying entirely on hope that everything will somehow work out. If I'm Neville here, I'm not charging straight in. I'm stopping at the entrance, calling for Sam from the doorway with my weapon up, and keeping a clear line back to daylight behind me the entire time. Because the second you lose your exit, the building owns you. But sure enough, disaster strikes almost immediately. Neville finds Sam cornered by infected dogs, and these things might be even scarier than the Darkseekers themselves. They're unbelievably aggressive, incredibly fast, and attack in packs. Neville manages to fight them off, but not before Sam gets bitten trying to protect him. And honestly, this scene hurts every single time. But back at the house, Neville desperately tries treating the bite, even though deep down he already knows the outcome. As the infection begins taking hold, Sam slowly transforms into the very thing they've been fighting all these years. And Neville has no choice but to say goodbye before peacefully ending her suffering. It's genuinely one of the saddest moments in the entire movie. And from this point onward, you can see something inside Neville completely break. This is where he makes what I think is the biggest mistake in the entire film. Instead of sticking to the routine that's kept him alive for 3 years, he lets grief take control. The very next day, he drives straight into infected territory, screaming at the Darkseekers to come and fight him. And let's just say, this is basically signing your own death warrant. Revenge has absolutely no place in the apocalypse. The infected don't care how angry you are, they don't care who you've lost, and they certainly aren't going to fight fair. All revenge does is convince you to take fights you never needed to have in the first place. Neville chases one of the infected through the streets before suddenly finding himself surrounded by dozens more. At this point, it's over. There's no way out, no backup, and nowhere to run. If Anna hadn't arrived at the exact moment with powerful UV lights, Neville would have died right there. And that's another lesson I take away from this movie. Never build your survival strategy around getting lucky, because luck runs out eventually. Anna drives him back to his house, and when Neville wakes up the next morning, he discovers he isn't alone anymore. Anna introduces herself and explains that she, along with a young boy named Ethan, have been traveling in search of a survivor colony up in Vermont. Now, to be fair, if I'd spent the last 3 years believing I was the only person left alive, I'd probably be a little suspicious too, as two random strangers suddenly appearing out of nowhere sounds like the beginning of another trap. So I actually don't blame Neville for questioning them at first. That being said though, once I'm convinced they're genuinely immune and they're telling the truth about this colony, my priorities completely change. See, up until now, Neville has been surviving, and he's done an incredible job of staying alive on his own. But surviving and actually rebuilding humanity are two completely different things. If there's a real settlement full of immune people living safely outside New York, then I'm not even thinking twice. I'm packing everything I can fit into the car, taking my supplies, my weapons, and leaving the city at the first opportunity. At this point, I've already proven I can survive on my own. Joining other survivors massively increases my chances of staying alive long term. More people means more security, more food production, more medical knowledge, and most importantly, not spending every single day talking to mannequins just to stay sane. Neville, however, refuses to believe the colony exists. He's convinced that his cure is almost complete, and while I genuinely admire that determination, this is where I think his judgment starts getting clouded. He's become so focused on saving humanity that he's forgotten to save himself. Sometimes, surviving means accepting that you can't fix everything. If I've got the chance to escape the most dangerous city in America with 2 other immune survivors, I'm taking it, because I can always continue researching somewhere safer. I don't need to stay surrounded by thousands of infected every single night. Later that evening though, Neville notices something outside his house that completely changes the situation. Standing just beyond his floodlights is the Alpha Darkseeker, the same one whose infected companion Neville captured earlier in the movie. And this reveal is one of the creepiest moments in the entire film, because it proves something we've slowly been learning throughout the entire story. These infected aren't mindless monsters. The Alpha hasn't come to randomly attack the house. He's come to rescue someone he actually cares about. He tracked Neville across the city, found his home, and gathered the other infected together to launch an organized attack. At this point, I'm officially done underestimating these things. One thing I would have done very differently from the beginning is assume the infected were intelligent until proven otherwise. Neville spent years treating them almost like wild animals, but they repeatedly showed signs of planning ahead. They set traps, they communicate, they remember faces. They even have some form of leadership. If I'm fighting enemies capable of doing all of that, I'm preparing for them like they're people, not zombies. But the attack finally begins. And credit where it's due, Neville's house holds up surprisingly well. The steel shutters stay in place, the floodlights slow the infected down, and for a while, it actually looks like his defenses are going to survive. But eventually, sheer numbers begin winning. The infected start smashing through the outer barriers before finally cracking the reinforced glass, protecting the lab below. And this is exactly why I would never rely on just one safe house. Now, don't get me wrong, Neville built an incredible base. It's probably one of the best apocalypse homes we've seen in any movie, but no matter how strong your fortress is, if enough enemies attack it for long enough, it'll eventually fail. Personally, I'd have multiple backup locations prepared, maybe even another secure house outside the city, maybe even an underground shelter somewhere quieter, or even a boat ready to leave Manhattan if things ever got out of control. The biggest mistake survivalists can make is assuming they'll never have to abandon their base. You should always expect the worst case scenario and prepare for it before it happens. begins. As the infected break deeper into the house, Neville, Anna, and Ethan retreat into the underground lab. While preparing to make his final stand, Neville suddenly notices something incredible. The woman he'd been testing with his latest treatment has actually been cured. After years of failed experiments, countless disappointments, and thousands of hours of research, he finally did it. He actually found a cure. Now, I absolutely love this payoff because it rewards Neville's determination, but it also raises a very difficult question. If I were standing in his shoes at that exact moment, would I stay behind to make sure humanity gets the cure, or would I try escaping with everyone else? Honestly, I still think there's another option. Instead of waiting until the infected have already broken into the house, I'd have left much earlier. The second Anna tells me about a survivor colony, that's enough motivation for me to leave New York, load the vehicles during the daytime, leave at sunrise the following morning, and drive as far away from the city as possible before sunset. The cure comes with us. Anna and Ethan come with us. Everybody survives. The real Neville, however, is another story. Realizing he can no longer escape, he fills a vial with the cured blood and hands it over to Anna. He then seals Anna and Ethan inside a coal chute, giving them one final chance to reach the colony while he stays behind to hold the infected off. It's an incredibly heroic moment, and I genuinely respect Neville's sacrifice. He knows exactly what's about to happen, yet he chooses to put humanity ahead of himself. That's bravery in its purest form. But as the Alpha Darkseeker and the rest of the infected burst into the lab, Neville pulls the pin on a grenade, sacrificing himself and destroying everyone inside the room. Anna and Ethan manage to escape with the cure before eventually reaching the survivor colony, where humanity finally has hope for a future. And that is exactly where my version of this movie would have ended differently. Because if I'd survived everything Neville survived over those 3 years, I'm not dying in the final 10 minutes because I refused to leave. My biggest advantage throughout the movie would have been recognizing when a battle was no longer worth fighting. New York served its purpose, but once another safe location became available, staying behind only created unnecessary risk. And looking back at the whole movie, almost every mistake traces back to the same root problem. Neville never learned when to let go. So if I wanted to survive I Am Legend, my strategy is actually pretty simple. Leave major cities as early as possible. Never stay out after sunset. Assume the infected are intelligent from day one. Avoid becoming predictable. Always have multiple escape plans. And the second I discover an actual survivor colony, I'm gone. But because you made it to the end, make sure to go down and subscribe. And while you're still here, click the video on screen. I'm sure you'll love it.